In the future, Home Sweet Home will see some big changes.
We see a massive influx of people moving into cities.
And not only cities. How about caves on the moon?
The first person to get there and build in that cave will own that cave.
Do you think a lunar cave sounds strange? Try this.
If somebody had said to me, we're going to make a living space out of a parking space, I would have said, cool.
The future is coming to where you live. Next on Earth 2050.
Hi, I'm Joe Pennant and welcome to Earth 2050. At last count, more than half of the world's population lives in cities. Here in Los Angeles, the population averages about 8,000 people per square mile. In Manhattan, it's close to 70,000 people. If you think that sounds crowded, consider this. There are cities in China where the population density is 40 times what it is here.
One neighborhood in Hong Kong has an incredible 340,000 people packed into 1 square mile. As we approach 2050, even more people, billions, will be moving out of the countryside and into cities.
So we're looking at an increase in about 5 billion people moving into urban areas. And that's a massive increase in density.
For most of human history, overcrowding wasn't really a big problem. Just 1,000 years ago, the population of the entire world was 350 million people. Today, that's the current population of just the United States. And now, in the run-up to 2050, the number of people on this planet is exploding.
The population is rising, and we're going to have to deal with having 2 billion more people in the year 2050.
That's a total world population of 9 billion people. So what will people do? What we've been doing since the beginning of time: adapt and survive. The first challenge will simply be dealing with the population density created by having so many people.
With that density comes a need for affordable housing. And affordable housing is difficult to come by now and in present times. So in the future, as we get denser, it's going to be even more challenging.
So students and faculty at the Savannah College of Art and Design, or SCAD, have come up with a possible source of housing that no science fiction writer has ever dreamed of: parking garages. They're converting parking garages into living spaces.
If you look at cities, there's parking garages all over the place. And rather than to say, all right, this is a parking garage, we should put cars in there, a good designer would ask the question, well, it's a parking garage, what can it provide?
A quarter of SCAD's parking garage has been converted into an experiment in the future of urban living. 3 tiny parking spaces are now apartments. They're called SCAD pads.
Each structure is 18 feet by about 10 feet, about 10 feet high with 2 feet underneath and a few feet above. It's 135 square foot of living space on the interior, and in this space is quite literally everything somebody needs to live.
And how can a person live in a space slightly bigger than a large car? SCAD student Glennis Laughlin had the same question.
I'm a writer, so I seek out new experiences, and I felt like this was a new experience. You know, you don't hear of a lot of people living in a parking space.
Each apartment has a fully functional bathroom, a kitchen, a sleeping area, storage space, a working area, and of course, heating and air conditioning. Still, when Glennis first moved in, she wasn't so sure.
135 square feet is very small. I was apprehensive about, where I would put things and how small the space would be, like if I would get claustrophobic.
Could this be the future of urban living? SCADPad's designers say that it makes perfect sense. After all, parking garages are all over the place, and since they're designed to hold hundreds of cars, they're built to last.
There are so many parking garages out there that are being underutilized now, and they provide us with a huge opportunity to recreate a way to live in an urban environment.
Maybe it works as an experiment, but as an actual place to live in for years? Coming up, our SCADPad tenant gives us a guided tour.
I can walk the length of my SCAD pad in about 5 paces. So everything is all here. Kitchen, bed, bathroom.
Welcome back to Earth 2050. This is a typical urban parking space. In the US, there are more than 105 million of them. That's 5 for every single car, and that's just in the United States. Could at least some of these spaces be converted into living spaces? Some people seem to think so. They even have a name for it. They call it adaptive reuse.
When you talk about adaptive reuse and living in the future, the greenest building is the one that's already built. And so why not reinvent the buildings that we already have rather than knocking them down to start over again?
And they say that parking garages providing a perfect opportunity to reuse existing structures. Why? Because millions of people are moving into cities, and more of these people aren't using cars.
Parking garages were made for a different time. They were made for a different era when we had a lot of space, the luxury of a lot of space, and people who really enjoyed cars. In the future, that's no longer going to be the case.
But is it really practical, or is it just a neat idea? SCADPAD tenant Glennis Laughlin says it's an idea whose time has come. And she gave us a guided tour of her tiny apartment.
Welcome to my SCADPAD. This is my kitchen area. I have a refrigerator and a freezer, a little hot plate, and a sink over here. Right here is my iPad where I can control everything in my SCADPAD. I can turn the lights on and off by pressing a button. I can also fog the windows if I want a little bit of privacy, if I'm taking a shower or going to bed. Over here is my bathroom. I have a shower, a sink, and a toilet. And over here is my bed. That becomes a couch during the day, and I can put my bedding and my clothing in drawers underneath the bed. So everything is all here. Kitchen, bed, bathroom. So, yeah.
Glennis says that living in such a small place gave her no choice about how she lives. She had to change certain habits. And she says that that's not a bad thing.
Living here has definitely changed how I think about living. I've become a lot more aware of how I live, how much I consume, how much time I'm spending inside and outside. It's definitely changed how I think about living.
SCADPAD residents grow a lot of their own food and vegetable patches right outside their apartments. Sunlight is actually patched in from the roof of the parking garage.
We're bringing daylight directly into the darker areas of the parking garage through fiber optic cables.
Much of the water is recycled and used in the vegetable patches, and a lot of the garbage is also recycled.
So we have food scraps that go in here. This is our composting. It's vermiculture. It means that worms take care of the soil, process about a pound a day.
Every resource is maximized, and that's something that futurists say is a definite trend worldwide as we approach 2050.
I'm used to recycling at home, but I wasn't really used to composting, and I found that was one of the major benefits from living here. It's definitely changed how I think about what is waste and what is not waste.
And this experiment in living, some call it microhousing, is about more than living in a small space. Community areas are built into the garage too. That way residents can get out of their individual apartments and share time with neighbors.
What you have is this wonderful combination of privacy in your own microhouse and community literally right outside your door.
Will this be a reality by 2050 or before? SCADPAD designers say yes. There will be hundreds of underused parking garages in cities all over the world, and also millions of people who need an efficient, inexpensive place to live.
Like any good design, it's going to probably get a lot more creative in that there's going to be different parking garages in different cities that offer homeowners, if you will, a different kind of living in a different kind of garage.
So yes, a parking garage in your city could one day be your new apartment.
If you get enough people invested in this kind of living, I honestly think that we could be seeing many of these popping up throughout the country.
Coming up on Earth 2050, it's hot, it's cold, it's dangerous, and soon it will be home.
There are already caves on the moon. It's a ready-made house.
Hi, I'm Joe Pena, and welcome back to Earth 2050. Only 3 countries have ever been to the moon: the US, Soviet Union, and China. But believe it or not, down this alleyway in Pittsburgh, there's a company that's planning a trip to the lunar surface. And if they make it, they'll be the very first private company in the world to do it.
This is very similar to Columbus and the early expeditions to the New World. It took explorers to go explore places for the very first time, and now we're seeing that same transition in space.
The moon. Not the most hospitable place. Temperatures range from 260 degrees Fahrenheit, well above boiling, to 280 degrees below zero. So cold it freezes almost anything upon contact. And even worse, it's constantly bombarded with radiation from the sun.
That's hard radiation. When you hear a solar flare, on Earth it's kind of cool. You get a little radio interference and maybe you see a cool, northern lights. But in space you die.
But if we humans want to live on other planets, a dream of explorers for centuries, the moon is where we'll have to go first.
The moon really is the next big step in exploration to living and exploring the worlds beyond our own. If you look at something like going to Mars, it's quite a lot more of a challenge than getting to the moon. If we want to learn to live off of Earth, the moon really is the next logical step.
People think of the moon as a wasteland, a desert where nothing is possible. We need to change that. We need to start realizing that there's water there, there's resources there, there's real economic value there.
One of the first steps in changing the view of the moon as a wasteland is to let people know that we could live there. And plans are underway right now to do just that.
We'll have man on the moon by 2050 and earlier. I think it's inevitable.
Yes, we're going to be in caves on the moon, and probably before 2050.
How did the possibility of living on the moon change from fantasy to potential reality? One big reason was the recent discovery of about 200 of these pits, or caves, on the lunar surface.
If there are already caves on the moon, and you can go to the moon and seal the insides of the caves and make them airtight, and put a door on that roof, that hole that we can see the caves in, it's a ready-made house.
For a long time, scientists thought that these caves were created by asteroids hitting the moon billions of years ago. But a closer examination of these photos revealed that instead of the moon being hit from the outside, these caves were created by activity inside the moon, by ancient volcanoes.
It's very interesting in understanding the origins of the moon, which are very related to the origins of the Earth.
The caves were formed by the lunar surface collapsing on itself, creating caves, not craters.
The caves on the moon are lava tunnels. They're hollows underneath.
And those hollow areas are protected from the sun, from radiation.
It's a very good environment for people to just begin to learn to settle beyond Earth.
Down in the cave, it's constant temperature all the time.
This cave is the one getting all the attention. And it could be the very first place that humans live outside planet Earth. It's about a quarter mile across, and it has a unique shape.
One of the walls of that pit has collapsed, which creates a natural ramp to potentially drive down and get to the bottom of the pit and have an entryway to a lunar cave network underneath the surface.
Astrobotics is planning an unmanned trip to the moon in 2015. It's part of the race for the $30 million Google Lunar X Prize.
The Google X Prize is the biggest prize ever. It's for the first to land on the moon, drive 500 meters, and send back pictures and video. And whoever does it first wins.
Astrobotics plans to land this solar-powered vehicle on the lunar surface. After conducting a series of experiments, this little guy will go to the edge of the lunar cave.
Our first mission will fly over that, land near it, deploy a small robot that will go out and look at it, try to see what the structures look like, see if there's something down there to explore in the future.
No one knows for certain what the rover will find, but the young explorers at Astrobotics are optimistic.
This could be the most accessible place on the surface of the moon for future settlements. It could be the hottest real estate play on the moon.
It's a strange irony. On Earth, man's first home was in caves, and it looks like the same thing will happen when we finally live in outer space.
There's a law. International law says you can't own the moon, but you can build stuff there. So the first person to get there and build in that cave will own that cave.
Next on Earth 2050, solar power. It's coming from this neighborhood to yours.
We're going to see a lot more neighborhoods with a lot of solar panels.
The sun, the center of our solar system, the ultimate power generator. At its core, it's an incredible 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. In just 1 second, it creates enough power to take care of the entire planet's energy needs for 500,000 years. Harnessing more of that energy is something that everyone, from businessmen to conservationists, say is vital to the planet's future.
We have a lot of folks who are participating in our research. They call themselves pioneers. We're learning all sorts of fascinating insights on where energy is headed.
And ground zero for research into solar power is Austin, Texas. A place that knows a lot about the power of the sun. Baking on the plains of central Texas, it sees temperatures of well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
In the summertime in Austin, Texas, we use a lot of electricity.
One of Austin's answers to energy conservation can be found in a small suburb just north of the city. It's called Pecan Street, and it's been described as a living laboratory. This neighborhood looks pretty typical, but it's actually got one of the highest concentrations of solar power homes in the country. That means it's not only consuming energy, it's generating it too. More than 200 homes in this neighborhood are outfitted with solar panels, and that means each house has its own power source.
This neighborhood is a window into the future of where homes and neighborhoods are going to be going in the next 2-3 decades.
Tell me about being an active participant in your energy consumption.
Before I got my solar panels, I was a very passive user. I simply got my electric bill at the end of the month and I paid it. I thought, well, I used something. I wasn't even really sure what it meant.
The key to how Pecan Street works is that residents are actively involved in their own energy consumption. Each home is equipped with something called a smart meter.
What a smart meter is, it's just basically the classic old electric meter, except that it can generate and distribute its data wirelessly as opposed to requiring someone to come look at it.
It sounds simple enough, but this is actually a revolutionary bit of design. The smart meter allows residents to monitor exactly how the energy in their home is being consumed in real time from any location. They can use their computer or even a smartphone. What are we looking at today?
Well, this is a graph of my electric usage today. You can see that the red is what I'm using and the green is what I'm generating from my solar panels.
And this is where Pecan Street is really on the road to the future. On a hot afternoon in Austin, energy usage spikes as millions of consumers crank up their air conditioner to deal with the heat. But at the same time, these solar panels are soaking up huge amounts of sun and producing huge amounts of electricity.
We have a lot of homes in this neighborhood where they are producing more electricity in their rooftop than they consume in their homes.
Not only do most residents break even or spend very little to power their homes, everyone's electricity costs come down. In fact, these panels generate so much electricity that Pecan Street residents are actually able to sell the electricity they don't use back to the power company. Where do you see this going in 10, 20, 30 years? I mean, do you see every home with a solar panel?
What I think is that there are going to be quite a few people that have solar panels and quite a few people that don't. But all of how they all interact together will be very important, and I think overall will reduce the usage of everybody.
Pecan Street residents have become so active in their energy consumption and are saving so much money that many are now driving electric cars charged by their solar panels.
This neighborhood that's right over my shoulder has the nation's highest residential concentration of electric cars. We're going to see a lot more neighborhoods with a lot of solar panels.
With all this solar power, Pecan Street carbon emissions are more than 60% lower than any neighborhood in Austin. Developers say that this is the future of energy, or at least part of it. Solar power is cheap, and the technology used to harness it quickly pays for itself. In the run-up to 2050, the world's oldest source of power could be the new way in which we all save money on energy and do our part to save the environment as well.
Welcome back to Earth 2050. As we've seen, there's plenty of innovation going on in cities around the world right now. Futurists know that the future is going to be crowded, and they want to be ready, which means that places like this could one day be your home sweet home.
You have your bed, your living room, your office, your kitchen, even your bathroom. It's all in one space, and you have to adapt to a space like this, but it wasn't that difficult, really, to adapt. One of the adaptations is learning how to live with less. You know, you have a few storage areas. You have storage underneath your bed, you have storage in the kitchen area, but you do have to live with less.
There's no telling where we could be going in the future. Living on the moon has been a science fiction fantasy for decades, but a lot of people say that they're certain that by the year 2050, that fantasy will become a reality.
The moon is our nearest neighbor, and the closest place to start to learn to live off the land and start to learn how to use the resources from another extraterrestrial body for people back here on Earth.
By 2050, one of the moon bases will certainly be in an underground hole in the moon. Another place will be right near the poles of the moon, where there's probably ice, and there'll be permanent shadow and permanent light. And if you put a solar array so that it's always in the sun on the pole of the moon, you can always have shielding, ice, everything you need.
And who will make these dreams come true? Maybe someone watching this show. Because after all, every generation is responsible for moving us forward onto the path of the future. That's it for this week's edition of Earth 2050. I'm Joe Pena. I'll see you next time.